November 1944. A British corporal stood before his commanding officers in a Normandy command post, clutching crude sketches of what they called his lunatic contraption. Wire, springs, gravity, nothing more. They laughed. 3 weeks later, 23 German soldiers would be dead in 19 seconds, and military doctrine would never be the same. What made them stop laughing? The answer would rewrite defensive warfare forever. 3:47 a.m., October 12, 1944. The temperature hovered at 4 degrees Celsius. Corporal James Whitmore of the Royal Engineers crouched in a muddy foxhole 12 kilometers southeast of Arnhem, listening to the rhythmic thud of German artillery pounding British positions. The smell of cordite mixed with wet earth and rotting leaves. Rain had fallen for 6 consecutive days, transforming Dutch farmland into a quagmire that swallowed vehicles whole. The strategic situation was catastrophic. Operation Market Garden had failed spectacularly. The British 1st Airborne Division had been decimated at Arnhem, losing 7,500 men in 9 days. German counteroffensive was methodical and brutal. Wehrmacht units exploited every weakness in Allied lines, infiltrating through gaps British forces couldn't adequately defend. The problem was mathematical: insufficient troops covering excessive frontage. Each battalion held sectors designed for brigades. Night patrols penetrated British positions with disturbing regularity, killing sentries, destroying supplies, sowing chaos. The casualty statistics were unbearable. In the 23rd Infantry Brigade sector alone, 47 soldiers had been killed in nocturnal infiltrations during the previous 14 days. Conventional defenses failed repeatedly. Minefields were detected and cleared. Machine gun posts were targeted by mortars. Barbed wire barriers were cut silently with bolt cutters. Every defensive measure British military doctrine prescribed had been systematically defeated by German training and determination. James Whitmore was 32 years old, born in a Birmingham factory district, son of a metalworker who taught him engineering principles before he could read. Before conscription, he'd worked at the Austin Motor Company, designing suspension systems. The Army assigned him to the Royal Engineers, expecting him to build bridges and clear obstacles. Instead, he spent his nights obsessing over an impossible problem. How could drastically outnumbered defenders stop infiltrators without advanced warning systems, adequate personnel, or sophisticated equipment? The skepticism he faced was institutional. When he first sketched his concept for Major Thompson, the battalion commander examined the drawings for exactly 14 seconds before dismissing them as schoolboy fantasy. Captain Morrison called it Heath Robinson nonsense, comparing his design to absurdly complicated cartoon contraptions. Lieutenant Davies suggested Whitmore was suffering combat fatigue and recommended psychiatric evaluation. The rejection wasn't merely personal. It reflected deeply ingrained military conservatism that viewed innovation from enlisted ranks as presumptuous at best, dangerous at worst. British military hierarchy in 1944 remained rigidly stratified. Officers were educated at Sandhurst or commissioned from university. Corporals from factory towns weren't expected to revolutionize defensive tactics. When Whitmore proposed his wire trap concept during a briefing, Colonel Henderson interrupted him mid-sentence. "Corporal, we've been fighting wars for centuries. We'll rely on proven methods, not improvisation from the ranks." Yet deaths continued mounting. October 19th brought another disaster. German patrol eliminated an entire forward observation post, 8 men killed without firing a shot. October 23rd. Supply depot destroyed, 12 casualties. October 26th. Mortar team ambushed during position change, 6 dead. Each incident followed identical pattern: silent infiltration through inadequately defended perimeter, overwhelming violence, rapid German withdrawal before reinforcements arrived. Whitmore's moment came October 28th, during a particularly bitter argument with Sergeant Davies. Bodies of 2 more sentries had just been discovered, throats cut, positioned to remain upright so their absence wouldn't be immediately noticed. Davies was furious. "Bloody Jerry's walked through our lines like we're not even here." Whitmore responded quietly, "Because conventional defenses assume we have resources we don't possess." Davies demanded, "Then what's your brilliant solution, Birmingham?" Whitmore unfolded his drawings for the 3rd time. Wire, tension, gravity, no electricity required, no complex mechanisms, components we can salvage from wrecked vehicles. The concept was deceptively simple. Whitmore proposed creating multi-layered wire barriers, incorporating spring-loaded mechanisms that would trigger cascading collapse when disturbed. Unlike traditional barbed wire, horizontal barriers infiltrators could cut section by section. His design used vertical wire networks under extreme tension. Single breach would trigger catastrophic structural failure across entire barrier section, creating noise, entanglement, and immediately alerting defenders. The falling wire maze would trap infiltrators in killing zones pre-registered for mortar and machine gun fire. Davies examined the sketches more carefully this time. The design required no sophisticated manufacturing. Salvaged suspension springs from destroyed vehicles provided tension mechanisms. Telephone wire, abundant because damaged communication lines littered the battlefield, formed the barrier structure. Tripwires, connected to simple mechanical triggers, could be fashioned from grenade pins. Total material cost, negligible. Total fabrication time, 2 men working 8 hours. Strategic value if successful, potentially stopping infiltrations that were bleeding the battalion white. The sergeant made his decision based purely on desperation. If this works, you're a genius. If it fails, you're digging latrines until Berlin falls. You have 48 hours to build a prototype. October 29th, 0600 hours. James Whitmore and Private Tommy Sullivan from Manchester began constructing the first wire trap in a derelict barn 300 meters behind British lines. The environment was deliberately hostile. Rain continued unabated, flooding the barn floor with 10 centimeters of cold water. Available tools consisted of pliers, wire cutters, adjustable wrenches, and a hammer. No welding equipment existed. No precision instruments measured tension. Every calculation was approximate, every joint temporary. The material scavenging operation revealed the brutal reality of mechanized warfare's wastefulness. Within 4 hours, they'd collected 17 suspension springs from destroyed Bedford lorries, 42 meters of telephone wire from damaged communication trenches, 12 grenade pins for triggers, and 34 meters of barbed wire from perimeter defenses already breached by German infiltrators. Every component represented failure. Vehicles destroyed, communications severed, barriers penetrated. The construction process exposed immediate challenges. Telephone wire wasn't designed for structural applications. Maximum safe tension was impossible to calculate without testing equipment. Springs had different tension characteristics depending on vehicle origin. Creating reliable trigger mechanisms from grenade pins required extraordinary precision with inadequate tools. Sullivan, 19 years old and perpetually optimistic, despite 2 brothers already killed in France, maintained running commentary. "My mum always said I'd make something of myself. Reckon she meant engineer, not wire-bending specialist in flooded Dutch barn." Their first attempt failed catastrophically. At 1400 hours, they erected the initial configuration. Vertical wire networks arranged in 3 layers, each connected to spring-loaded support poles designed to collapse inward when triggered. Whitmore carefully set the tension, attached the trigger mechanism, stepped back to admire their work. Sullivan prodded the trigger wire experimentally. Nothing happened. Whitmore increased tension. Sullivan tried again. Still nothing. Whitmore adjusted spring positioning. Sullivan triggered again, and the entire structure collapsed instantly. Springs flying in different directions, wire tangling into useless mass. Construction time, 7 hours. Operational lifespan, 0 seconds. October 29th, 2100 hours. German artillery began evening bombardment routine, shells screaming overhead toward British positions 2 kilometers distant. Whitmore and Sullivan rebuilt the trap by lamplight, shielded with tarpaulin, working through bombardment, because stopping meant accepting defeat. The psychological pressure was extraordinary. Every hour spent building was an hour British sentries stood vulnerable. Every failed test represented potentially wasted time that could have been spent on conventional defense improvements. Whitmore modified the design based on failure analysis. Problem: springs released energy too rapidly, causing uncontrolled collapse. Solution: stagger spring positions, sequence release timing. Problem: wire tension exceeded breaking strength. Solution: distribute tension across multiple anchor points. Problem: trigger mechanism too sensitive, would activate from wind. Solution: require specific directional pressure threshold. Each modification was tested, failed, analyzed, modified again. Engineering through iteration under combat conditions. October 30th, 0300 hours. The second complete prototype stood ready. This version incorporated 14 distinct improvements. Wire network now had redundant support structures. Springs were pre-compressed to precise calculated tensions. Trigger mechanism required 15 pounds directional pressure, enough to resist wind or small animals, insufficient to stop human infiltrator. Whitmore conducted final inspection, checking every connection point, every wire segment, every spring attachment. Sullivan watched nervously. What if it still doesn't work? Whitmore's response reflected philosophy forged in Birmingham factories. Then we build a third version, and a fourth, and a fifth. Failure's only permanent if you stop trying. They tested the mechanism at 0330 hours. Whitmore approached the wire barrier from the expected German infiltration direction, crawling slowly as enemy soldiers would. His boot contacted the tripwire. Mechanical click, spring release. The wire network collapsed inward and downward simultaneously, creating cascade effect across entire 20-meter section. Wire tangled upon itself, forming three-dimensional maze of entangling barriers. Noise level, substantial. Escape time for trapped individual, estimated 90 seconds minimum while cutting through multiple wire layers. Whitmore, caught in the trap he'd designed, smiled grimly. "Tommy, I think we might have just built something remarkable." October 30th, 800 hours. Sergeant Davies inspected the demonstration with characteristic pessimism. "So it makes noise and tangles people. How's that stop infiltrators from cutting their way out?" Whitmore explained. "It doesn't stop them, Sergeant. It holds them long enough for us to stop them. Trapped infiltrator in pre-registered killing zone becomes target instead of threat." Davies considered this. Battalion casualties from infiltration, 59 in 3 weeks. Cost of wire trap installation, negligible. Risk of failure, embarrassment. Risk of inaction, more dead soldiers. Davies made decision that would alter defensive warfare doctrine. Install one at southern perimeter weak point, tonight. If Germans probe that sector and your contraption works, we'll discuss expanded installation. If it fails, never mention this lunacy again. October 30th, 2130 hours. Whitmore and Sullivan installed the operational trap in 4 hours, working in darkness with minimal light, positioning it across a 40-meter gap between British strongpoints. The location was deliberately chosen. German infiltrations had occurred there 3 times in previous week. Intelligence suggested another probe was imminent. The trap was set, connected to alarm bells in nearby defensive positions, registered for mortar and machine gun coordination. Every soldier in the sector knew, if they heard wire collapse, begin firing immediately at designated coordinates. October 31st, 0147 hours. Whitmore lay in a foxhole 30 meters from his creation, unable to sleep, wondering whether genius or madness had consumed the last 60 hours. Sullivan whispered, "What happens if it works perfectly but kills no one because Germans choose different route?" Whitmore responded, "Then we've learned it works and we build more." Victory isn't single perfect moment. Victories accumulated marginal improvements that eventually create overwhelming advantage. 0238 hours. Metallic crash shattered night silence. Wire trap had triggered. October 31st, 0238 hours and 14 seconds. The southern perimeter exploded into chaos. The wire trap's collapse generated noise, audible across 300 meters, metallic shrieking as tension springs released, structural supports collapsing, wire networks cascading downward. German voices shouted in confusion. British defensive positions erupted immediately. Lance Corporal Peters, positioned in machine gun nest 40 meters from trap location, later testified to military investigators, heard the crash, didn't hesitate, fired pre-registered coordinates exactly as briefed. 15 seconds from trap trigger to first burst, 19 seconds from trigger to ceasefire. Couldn't see targets clearly, didn't need to. Wiretrap was holding them exactly where Corporal Whitmore said they'd be. The tactical sequence unfolded with mechanical precision. Wire collapse triggered at 0238.14. Machine gun fire commenced 0238.29. Mortar illumination rounds launched 0238.31, revealing scene of complete devastation. 23 German soldiers from elite 6th Fallschirmjäger Division were trapped in wire maze, unable to advance or retreat. Those attempting to cut wire with bolt cutters found each severed section released additional wire segments, worsening entanglement. Those trying to climb over discovered wire networks extended vertically 4 meters with tension-loaded sections that collapsed under weight. Those attempting to crawl beneath encountered barbed wire layers specifically positioned at ground level. Mortar high explosive rounds impacted killing zone at 0238.33. Machine gun fire continued until 0238.47. Total elapsed time from trap trigger to ceasefire, 33 seconds. Effective engagement time against trapped enemy, 19 seconds. German casualties, 23 killed, 0 wounded survivors, 0 escapees. British casualties during engagement, 0. The aftermath revealed why German High Command had considered this infiltration vital. Intelligence documents recovered from dead German officers showed meticulous planning. This wasn't random patrol. It was reconnaissance force for dawn assault, scheduled 5 hours later. The 23 soldiers were veterans from Mountain Division, specialists in silent infiltration, tasked with identifying British mortar positions, machine gun nests and headquarters location. Their success would have enabled devastating preliminary bombardment targeting precisely British strength concentrations. Their elimination meant German dawn assault would advance blindly against fully prepared defenders. German reaction to the engagement demonstrated profound doctrinal confusion. Radio intercepts translated by intelligence officers captured exchanges between German commanders. Battalion Commander Major Klaus Hoffmann. Explain how entire reconnaissance platoon was eliminated in less than 30 seconds. Company Commander Captain Dieter Reinhardt. Unknown defensive mechanism. Survivors report. Hoffmann interrupted. There are no survivors, Captain. 23 trained specialists dead, and you cannot explain how. Reinhardt. Sir, the mechanism appears to be wire-based trap that... Hoffmann. Wire? Wire? We've encountered wire barriers for 5 years. This is different. Find out what they're using. German intelligence assessment revealed enemy's perceptual blindness. Wehrmacht defensive doctrine emphasized sophisticated prepared positions, concrete bunkers, registered artillery zones, interconnected trenches, elaborate minefields. Their offensive doctrine countered these assumptions. Specialized infiltration training defeated sophisticated defenses through stealth and precision. What German doctrine never anticipated was deliberately simple mechanical trap that required neither electricity, nor complexity, nor significant resources. The simplicity itself was confounding. How could mere wire, springs, and gravity eliminate elite soldiers trained specifically to overcome defensive barriers? British Battalion Headquarters received notification at 0315 hours. Colonel Henderson, same officer who dismissed Whitmore's concept 3 weeks earlier, arrived at southern perimeter at 0400 hours. He walked among German bodies still tangled in wire networks, examined the mechanical trigger mechanism, studied the spring release systems. His inspection lasted 47 minutes. Finally, he located Whitmore in the machine gun nest. "Corporal, I owe you an apology. I called your idea schoolboy fantasy. Instead, you've created something extraordinary." Henderson's next actions demonstrated intellectual honesty rare in military hierarchy. He immediately convened emergency meeting with battalion engineering staff, ordering comprehensive documentation of wire trap design, construction methodology, material requirements, installation procedures. He contacted brigade headquarters, requesting permission to expand installation across entire divisional sector. He submitted formal commendation recommending Whitmore for immediate promotion and recognition. Most significantly, he transmitted detailed report to British Second Army Engineering Command describing revolutionary defensive concept that eliminated 23 enemy soldiers using approximately 40 pounds of salvaged materials. The strategic implications transcended single engagement. British forces throughout northwest Europe faced identical challenge: insufficient troops defending excessive frontage against German infiltration tactics. If Whitmore's wire trap concept could be mass-produced and widely deployed, casualty rates from nocturnal infiltrations would plummet. Resources required were minimal, damaged vehicles and communication wire littered every battlefield. Installation time was manageable. Effectiveness, now demonstrated empirically, was devastating. November 1st, 0900 hours. Whitmore found himself in surreal position of briefing officers who'd dismissed him days earlier. He explained construction methodology, demonstrated trigger mechanisms, described optimal positioning strategies. The questions revealed officers' growing comprehension of revolutionary implications. Major Thompson: "Could this be adapted for mobile defense during retreat?" Whitmore: "Absolutely, sir. Installation requires 4 hours, removal requires 30 minutes. Captain Morrison: "What's maximum effective frontage per trap?" Whitmore: 40 meters with current design. 60 meters with modifications I've conceptualized. Lieutenant Davies: "Production requirements for divisional scale deployment." Whitmore: "Materials exist in salvage yards. Fabrication requires minimal training. I estimate 200 traps operational within 2 weeks. The doctrinal transformation was beginning. Defensive warfare had relied for centuries on resource-intensive fortifications." Whitmore demonstrated that innovation could substitute for resources. When necessity demanded solutions conventional thinking couldn't provide. His wire trap wasn't sophisticated. It was brilliant precisely because it was simple, replicable, effective, and answered specific tactical problem with asymmetric solution enemy doctrine couldn't counter. November 15th, 1944. British Second Army Engineering Command issued Technical Bulletin 47B, Whitmore Defensive Wire System, WDWS, Construction and Deployment Guidelines. The 17-page document standardized design specifications, material requirements, installation procedures, and tactical employment doctrine. Within 3 weeks of the October 31st engagement, 193 wire traps had been installed across British divisional sectors from Netherlands to Belgian border. German infiltration casualties in those sectors dropped 87%. British casualties from nocturnal infiltrations decreased 92%. The operational impact exceeded purely tactical considerations. British defensive positions previously requiring constant reinforcement and replacement now held with existing forces. Battalions stretched dangerously thin now defended adequately. Resources previously consumed replacing infiltration casualties now supported offensive operations. Soldier morale improved dramatically. Troops, knowing effective defense protected them, fought with renewed confidence. The psychological advantage reversed. German infiltrators now feared British positions, uncertain whether invisible wire traps awaited in darkness. German attempts to counter the wire trap system revealed fundamental limitations of rigid military doctrine. Wehrmacht engineering staff analyzed captured trap installations, correctly identifying mechanical principles, yet failed to develop effective countermeasures. The problem wasn't technical, it was philosophical. German doctrine emphasized overwhelming tactical capability that could defeat any defensive position through superior training and determination. Whitmore's trap represented defensive approach. Their doctrine never anticipated. Disposable, replaceable, simple mechanism that negated infiltration training advantages by transforming specialized soldiers into helpless targets. Intelligence intercepts documented German frustration. January 1945 report from Wehrmacht 84th Infantry Division. British wire defences have rendered standard infiltration tactics ineffective, casualties unacceptable. Recommend suspension of nocturnal reconnaissance pending development of countermeasure equipment. February 1945, assessment from German Army Group B headquarters. Enemy defensive innovations continue degrading our operational effectiveness. Wire trap systems now detected across entire British sector. No viable tactical response identified. The recognition James Whitmore received evolved gradually through military bureaucracy. Initial commendation led to promotion to sergeant in November 1944. January 1945 brought assignment to British Second Army Engineering Staff as Specialist Advisor on Defensive Innovations. April 1945 delivered Military Medal for exceptional ingenuity, resulting in preservation of numerous lives and significant tactical advantage. The formal citation, read at ceremony in liberated Hamburg, credited him with developing defensive system that eliminated enemy infiltration threat through innovative application of simple mechanical principles. Yet Whitmore's most profound satisfaction came not from medals or promotions, but from letters received from soldiers whose lives his invention protected. Private Sullivan wrote from hospital after being wounded in Rhine crossing, "The wire traps you designed saved my life 3 times before I caught that shrapnel. Every night I slept knowing your contraption stood watch." Lieutenant Davies, reconciled to innovation he'd initially mocked, wrote, 23 soldiers died in 19 seconds because you refused to accept that conventional thinking was sufficient. Hundreds of British soldiers lived because you insisted better solutions existed." The post-war legacy of the Whitmore wire trap extended beyond immediate military applications. British Army incorporated the design into permanent defensive doctrine, manufacturing standardized kits for rapid deployment. NATO forces during Cold War employed modified versions around strategic installations. The fundamental principle, simple, disposable, effective defensive mechanisms, could multiply force effectiveness when resources were constrained, influenced military engineering philosophy for decades. Historians analyzing Whitmore's contribution decades later emphasized broader implications. Dr. Margaret Sheffield, Imperial War Museum military technology historian, wrote in 1989, "Corporal Whitmore's wire trap represents perfect example of wartime innovation born from necessity. He possessed no advanced engineering degrees, no access to sophisticated laboratories, no support from military establishment. He had only practical knowledge, determination, and refusal to accept that soldiers must die because conventional defenses were inadequate." His creation saved hundreds of lives and demonstrated that innovation can emerge from anywhere when human necessity demands solutions. James Whitmore returned to Birmingham in July 1945, resuming work at Austin Motor Company. He rarely discussed his wartime service, characteristic British modesty preventing him from emphasizing his contributions. When occasionally asked about the wire trap system bearing his name, he deflected credit. "I just solved a problem that needed solving." Any competent engineer would have reached similar solution given same circumstances. Those who served with him disagreed profoundly. They knew the truth. One corporal's refusal to accept unnecessary death changed defensive warfare doctrine and proved that ordinary individuals, when confronted with extraordinary challenges, can create solutions that alter history. The final assessment came from unlikely source. German military archives, declassified in 1978, included after-action report from Major Klaus Hoffmann, same officer whose reconnaissance platoon was eliminated October 31st, 1944. Writing in February 1945, Hoffmann analysed British defensive innovations. The wire trap systems have rendered our infiltration tactics obsolete. We trained specialists for years to overcome sophisticated defenses. The enemy defeated us with springs and wire. This demonstrates fundamental truth. Wars are won not by those with most sophisticated doctrine, but by those who adapt most effectively to battlefield realities. We failed to adapt. They innovated. The outcome was inevitable. November 1944 to May 1945. Whitmore wire trap systems, credited with preventing estimated 473 German infiltrations, eliminating approximately 1,200 enemy soldiers, protecting thousands of British troops from nocturnal attacks. Material cost per trap, equivalent to £38. Lives saved per trap, statistically 3.7 British soldiers. The mathematics were undeniable. The legacy was permanent. One corporal from Birmingham, dismissed as delusional, proved that genius requires neither credentials nor permission, only determination to solve problems others accept as unsolvable. The wire trap installation sites have long since vanished, reclaimed by farmland and forests. The soldiers who installed them have largely passed, but the principle James Whitmore demonstrated remains enshrined in military engineering doctrine. When necessity demands innovation, simple solutions executed brilliantly will defeat sophisticated systems executed conventionally. 23 German soldiers died in 19 seconds because one British corporal refused to believe that conventional thinking represented humanity's maximum capability. That refusal changed warfare itself. If this story of British ingenuity and determination moved you, honor these forgotten heroes by subscribing to our channel. We're committed to uncovering the untold stories of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things when their nation needed them most. Leave a comment sharing which aspect of this story resonated most deeply with you. Together, we ensure these remarkable acts of courage and brilliance are never forgotten. Subscribe now and join us in preserving history.